Welcome to part 4 of my series going over the fights from Record of Ragnarok. For today's video, we're going to be going over round 4. For this, we're going to be going through chapters 20 through 29, which will be the direct aftermath of Sasaki Kojiro versus Poseidon to the very end of this fight. And I think I'll mention some things from chapter 30, because I think the information we get from that is kind of important. So, we start off immediately after Kojiro's victory and the death of Poseidon, which gets very different reactions from each side. You have all of the gods who are absolutely shocked, and all of the humans who are super excited because obviously this is the first time that a human has killed a god, and it proves that it is, in fact, possible for the humans to win this. You have Kojiro being cheered on by the audience, and as he's about to walk out, he, collapses. And the first time I went through this, I was scared shitless. I thought he was gonna die or something from blood loss, but he's just exhausted. But Hrist shows back up and catches him, so he's fine. That's great. This is the last time we've seen Kojiro so far. We don't know yet if the human combatants will ever come back to commentate. I hope they do, because it would be a shame if we didn't get to see Kojiro again, considering how awesome he is. But we get a little reminder from Brunhild that this is in fact a best of 13, and we still need 6 more wins, so it's not over yet. We've still got a long way to go. We flash over to the Palace of the Gods, where you have Zeus, Hermes, and Ares hanging out. Zeus is wrapped up in bandages and has this giant bump on his head from getting the fuck kicked out of him by Adam. There's like an indentation on his cheek from getting punched in the face. And Zeus seems to not really get why everyone's so upset right now, which is weird because his brother just got obliterated. So you'd think he'd be a little more torn up over this, but it seems like with the Olympians, their relationships are all kind of fucked up. But anyway, Shiva and Loki are there, and Shiva's pissed. And Loki's asking Zeus about why he's so calm about this, and Zeus's response is, oh, well, I guess just that human was stronger than Poseidon. There's not really anything to it. And this is where Zeus admits that humanity is strong. So, this ties back into the character development that he got from the end of round 2, where Adam died standing on his feet and pushed Zeus to his absolute limits, which caused a big change in him from before, when he basically thought humans were like ants. He thought they were a joke, that they could just be crushed without any real effort or anything. So Zeus saying this is a pretty big deal. Shiva gets excited and starts going Super Saiyan or whatever, and talks about how he's going to go next. And then he gets cucked again by Zeus, who's like, no. We have to repay the debt to Greece, because the first god to die was from Greece. So we're going to have to send one of our representatives to kill another human in turn. So after this little exchange between the gods, we go back to Brunhild and Geir, who are just walking back to their planning room or whatever. And this is where we get introduced to the next contender for the gods, Heracles, who is super good friends with Geir. It's very cute the way they interact with each other. And he seems to be on good terms with Brunhild as well. And Brunhild goes so far as to wish Heracles luck in the next round, which is very interesting when you consider the fact that Brunhild will have to pick the person whose job it is to try killing Heracles. So, yeah. After Heracles leaves, we have Loki showing up to talk to him. and Loki's questioning him about what exactly his motives are, and comments about him being a half-assed demigod. So that does carry over from Greek mythology. Heracles used to be a human, it seems. At least at this point, it seems he used to be a human. And Loki's like, hey, isn't this gonna be hard for you, since you used to be a human? Isn't fighting to exterminate the humans something that's gonna be tough for you? And Heracles says that, since he's the representative for the gods, he intends to have a fair fight. And he tells Loki that he's opposed to ending humanity. So this is very interesting. This is the first of the gods that doesn't seem to be interested in wiping out humanity, which brings up what I think was an issue from the first chapter, where it seemed like the gods had voted unanimously to wipe out humanity. So either the author forgot this, or they retconned it, or because Heracles is a demigod and not a pure god, he was not born divine, then maybe he is not allowed to vote. Who knows? I think that's probably the most likely thing. But Heracles says that after he wins his round, he intends to save humanity. He wants to convince the gods that humanity should not be wiped out. Now, this is what we call a big fucking red flag. So if Heracles wins and he succeeds in convincing the gods to not wipe out humanity, then that would mean that the tournament, and therefore the manga, would have to end. So when I saw this, I was like, uh-oh, buddy, that's a really fucking bad sign for you. But Heracles leaves, and he says, I'm always on the side of justice. And that's going to be his shtick going forward, is that he is the embodiment of justice, or whatever, for this round. So Brynhild is going to pick the person to fight Heracles, and she says that the person that she's choosing is the most despicable scum on Earth. There was another scan of this where she said this guy is a real son of a bitch, and then smacked down on his profile to pick him. I prefer that translation. I think that's way more entertaining than just despicable scum on Earth. And whenever characters say shit like that, real son of a bitch, I like that a lot more. I don't know what it is. But this is where we get the reveal of the arena for round 4. And it's a life-size replica of 19th century London. So this is already just absurd. The direction this is going in, we went from just like flat arenas to an entire cityscape that they're fighting in. Now this gets me very excited for some of the future arenas, considering what the specialty of some of the fighters are, like Simohaya, who's a sniper, so maybe we'll get like a forest arena for when he fights. But this is very cool. I'd also say it's very impressive how well the illustrator draws the environment. I can't imagine how long it took to do this. It's possible that they had someone else doing environment. I know they had like a team, like a lot of manga authors do, but Heimdall says that humanity's representative actually requested to have this as the arena, and Heracles, being the nice guy that he is, decided to accept. And Heimdall proclaims that this will be the first street fight between gods and humanity, which is already an awesome concept. I think when this fight originally started, I wasn't as hyped for it, just because of who the fighters were, in terms of, like, I guess their fighting style. I didn't find it as interesting, but we'll get into what an awesome street fight this is. And this is where we get introduced to the next fighter for humanity, who enters in like a cloud of fog. dressed very dapper. He has the Guy Fawkes mask from V for Vendetta. It's humanity's most infamous serial killer, Jack the Ripper. So Jack has so much fucking style. Like, holy shit, he is just fucking dripping. Jesus Christ, his design is top tier. I love the designs that the mangaka has been using for these characters, and now that the fifth fight has started, I can say safely that the awesome character design has continued. But we get this panel of Loki eating chips, and he's doing the duck face with them in his mouth. It's funny. It's great. Loki is one of the more entertaining characters, so again, very excited to see when he goes up. But he's enticed by the fact that Brunhild would pick Jack the Ripper and the fact that he would pick this arena to fight Heracles. And then we get Heracles coming in on like a chariot and being hyped up by like his 12 laborers, calling him the envoy of justice. He swings his club around and blows away all the fog. They say he is unparalleled in bravery, Heracles, from the Greek pantheon. And you see everyone cheering for him, including a bunch of children who, that was another red flag. What did they call him? Our eternal hero. So, when I see Heracles introduced as basically being these guys' Superman or whatever, with a bunch of fucking kids watching, while he's going to fight Jack the Ripper, a serial killer infamous for, like, cutting up prostitutes into fucking pieces and stuff, this already was a bad sign. This is gonna be a fucking bloodbath. This is gonna be a real vicious one. And with that, the two fighters being introduced, we have the start of the fourth round for realsies. You just have more of Heimdall hyping up the fighters. Heracles looks at the camera, and he looks very pissed off. And he's looking at Brunhild, and he thinks about how all of the other representatives for humanity, Lubu Adam, Sasaki Kojiro, were all really awesome people who are able to shake the hearts of the gods, which was something that we had seen with all of the fights so far. And he is very pissed that Brunhild would pick a piece of shit serial killer to be the person to fight him. And he yells out, "Don't fuck with me, Brunhild," which is probably not great for a role model in front of all these children, but whatever, you know, he's pissed. So the humans are kind of conflicted, because Heracles is a good guy. Everyone knows who Heracles is, obviously. He's a famous hero. And the person representing them is a serial killer. So, despite that, they still want to win and survive. So, this is a very difficult situation they're placed in. And this is where we're introduced to one of the human commentators for this round, that being Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle, who is the author of Sherlock Holmes. I know when he was originally introduced, there were a lot of people that thought he was actually Sherlock Holmes before they showed his name, because I think a lot of us are stupid and easily forget that Sherlock Holmes was not a real person. I know I forgot that for like half a second when originally reading this. But anyway, Heracles gives Jack the option to surrender, because he doesn't relish senseless killing. But he will kill Jack if he has to, especially because Jack is a piece of shit murderer. So Jack basically says, "Thanks, but no thanks. I can't turn down a duel. A gentleman must always accept a duel." And he pulls out this giant fucking scissors and says, "This is my Voland." And then he spins it around a bunch, cuts through a lamppost to show off how sharp it is and stuff. And then he runs away. In the middle of Heracles doing his speech, which is great. Heracles is surprised. about how much of a coward Jack is. Because with all the fights so far, everything's been pretty straightforward, and the guys just start fighting each other, but that is very clearly not Jack's style, as we will continue to see. Loki thinks this is hilarious, and Heracles gets pissed off, so he starts chasing after Jack, and comes down an alleyway, and he sees that Jack is sitting at a table pouring tea for himself, and says that it's tea time, so he has to take he needs 5 minutes just to enjoy some tea. And Heracles tries to run up on him, but stops because there's this wire right in front of his eyes that he notices. And he stops for a second to look at it. And then, like a complete fucking idiot, he just tears through it and keeps running forward. And after that, we have the reveal that this sprung a trap that had a bunch of knives falling down on Heracles. But because these knives are not his Voland, they just break immediately upon trying to hit Heracles. Because, of course, as established earlier, only a Voland can hurt a god. Heracles gets pissed again, and he asks Jack if Brynhild told him that human weapons can't hurt gods, and Jack, giving some interesting insight into his character, says that if you don't try something, you'll never know for sure, which is interesting. So Heracles immediately tries to smash Jack with his club, and Jack pulls out a gun and points it right at Heracles' face. But this gun was actually a grappling hook, which he shoots past Heracles to latch onto a ledge on one of the buildings, and he flies up towards the top of the building, then shoots off towards another building, keeps zipping away. So Heracles, being the extremely fucking strong guy that he is, just sort of leaps and destroys the ground under him. And now that he's gaining on Jack, Jack takes his giant scissors and tries to block Heracles' attack. But this shatters Jack's Voland. So, as established before, Volans are supposed to be pretty strong, though they can be broken. And it seems that Heracles was able to do this extremely easily, which is quite the showing of his strength. But everyone is shocked by the fact that Jack's Voland was broken so soon. And everyone's like, well, guess it's over, which is something that Heracles himself says. So Jack is cornered up against a wall and pulls out all of these knives, like the ones that he had used for the trap earlier, and he flings them all at Heracles. And then we get this reveal, with the surprise of everyone in the audience, that the knives actually cut Heracles. He has a bunch of knives sticking at him now, and he's bleeding. And no one seems to understand what's going on. And Jack's like, oh, right, I told you that my Voland was those scissors, right? Yeah, that was a lie. Oh, this is great. Something that I really like is when a story sort of throws the trope of the villain explaining exactly what their ability is to the protagonist right when their fight starts, which then allows the protagonist to formulate a plan to overcome that ability, which then creates the question of why don't you just not tell them or lie, which makes it so great when the villain just straight up lies about what their power is. So that's what Jack did here. He just bullshitted about his scissors being the Voland. So instead he reveals his true Voland, and they show him sticking his hands into this bag and pulling out a bunch more knives on strings. And this is where you get the reveal that Jack's Voland is actually a pouch of divine weapon creation. And he gives some rules about how it works, saying that he can't form anything larger than the pouch itself, and says that instead of having everything ready-made, it's all made to order, because that is the true essence of a gentleman. And Gare asks Brynhild why she would pick this terrible person to fight Heracles. And Brynhild has her fantastic explanation of why she chose Jack. What is the one thing that humanity excels above in the gods? Do you know? It is malice. And we get another one of Brunhild's creepy faces. So, we're going to see if the malice of humanity is able to overcome the virtue of the gods. And with that, we get into the first chapter where we will have Heracles' backstory. So there are two things that happen now. This is where we start getting into the quote-unquote double chapters, which was really when the author would release one chapter that's split into two chapters. Whatever. I think it's to say that you can put more chapters in a volume. But another thing is that we start off with a color page or two, which is the only time this has happened so far, and it looks fucking great. You get to see what Heracles looks like in color, Jack, Heimdall, and the audience, which is a very nice change, because when the audience is all just black and white, they don't really stand out much. It's just like looking at sort of a forest or something. It's just a forest of various people, but they all kind of look the same. So seeing them all with these different colors, really making them contrast with each other, is interesting. But after that, we just go back to black and white. Heracles pulls all the knives out of himself and crushes them, which is probably not great. I'm pretty sure when you're stabbed, you're supposed to, like, keep it in so you don't bleed to death. Whatever. Anyway, Loki pops over to the Greeks, which is awesome. So now we have more consistent interaction between the pantheons, which is something I always like. And you have Loki, our wonderful trickster god, hanging out with Hermes and Ares. And Ares gets pissed because Loki's being an asshole. And Ares talks about how he trusts in Heracles wholeheartedly. With this, you now have Jack using his Voland for real this time, and just pulling out all of these throwing knives and flinging them at Heracles like a certain anime character that I'm not going to name. But Heracles is just blocking all of them with his club. Jack just keeps flinging the knives over and over and over again. Heracles keeps blocking all of them. So then Jack starts holding the knives in a different way in his fingers and throws them so that they arc and they curve and they hit Heracles because he wasn't prepared for them to move like that. So now Heracles has had to sort of change his response. But this is where we get into Heracles' backstory now, as we see him still continuing to press onwards towards Jack. So we go back in time like 4,000 years to Thebes, and this is where we're introduced to Heracles when he was still a human named Alcides, and he's protecting this kid named Castor. But at this time, Alcides was just some weak loser kid. His body was weaker than anyone else. And Castor asks him why he would fight those guys, even though he's obviously weaker than them. And Heracles, or Alcides, says, oh, it's just because they're in the wrong. Obviously, I'm always going to fight people who are evil. I want to always be on the side of justice. And then we get into Heracles' training montage of him getting beat up, of him fighting giant monsters. And as he's doing this, we have some other side characters mentioning the ambrosia, the blood of Zeus, which, if consumed by a human with a strong enough will or whatever, they would become a god. But otherwise, they would die. So we get more training montage. We show that when given the option between two paths, he would always choose the tougher one without any hesitation, because by choosing the tougher path, he would be able to become stronger. And we show that Heracles has become much stronger now. He's all buff and stuff. And with this, we go to the Conference for Mankind's Survival, as we saw in the first chapter. We have Zeus here with his little dragon at this time. We see Aphrodite, whose boobs are smaller at this time. Interesting. And the golem things are just little tiny cherubs or whatever. It looks like she's been checking Twitter or whatever, and is like, man, yeah, the humans kind of suck in Thebes. Maybe not all of them are awful right now, but, like, maybe we should go deal with them. And then Loki's like, hey, let's go kill everyone there, like we did with the Tower of Babel. And he's wearing this ridiculous outfit with this big fucking, I forget what they're called. It's like you have a fucking napkin as a tie or whatever. We see some of the other gods. We see Odin, Poseidon, who's wearing a very fancy suit. I like this design a lot. I think I like it more than his battle armor design. And then we see Shiva, who looks way buffer than he does in the present. And he's wearing, like, a necklace or whatever. I don't know. And he has all these orbs flying around him, but he's pretty cool. He says he'll go, and then he gets cucked again, but in the past. So I guess he's been cucked like 3 times now. But this is where Ares says that he'll go since Thebes falls within the jurisdiction of the Greek pantheon. And we see Ares and all of his retainers, these angel-like guys, descending out of the sky to destroy Thebes for their sins. And he says how the people of Thebes are now subject to the justice of the gods. This we show off more of the divine army and how all the humans are freaked out and scared. And there's one single man, standing in front of the gates to defend Thebes, and it's Alcides. So he charges at Ares, and he just gets kicked in the face. He's just no threat at all. And as Ares and his army are about to charge and destroy Thebes, Alcides takes out the ambrosia and drinks it. And then he catches on fire or whatever, but it looks like he dies, like his body disintegrates or whatever. And Ares makes a comment about how he's just a fucking idiot. And then we reveal that the ambrosia actually did work, and it made him huge and have long, lighter colored hair. You can't really tell what it is right now. But when Ares looks at Heracles, or I guess he's still Alcides at this point, he sees Zeus in his eye, which I guess is supposed to show that Heracles has strength on par with Zeus, possibly, or it's just because the ambrosia is the blood of Zeus or whatever. But one of the retainers tries to attack Alcides, and he immediately kills the guy with his club, which I originally thought was like a plot hole or something, but then I remembered Hermes showed early on in the series that gods can just turn whatever into divine weapons, so I guess that's alright. And then Ares' entire army tries to charge Alcides, and Ares freaks out trying to tell them to stop. We get a little bit of a flash forward to after most of the fighting has happened, and we see that the entire army has been destroyed, and that Ares is a bit roughed up, and he's having a fist fight with Alcides. And as they're both about to attack each other again, Zeus shows up and grabs both of their fists and just stops it. There's like a big explosion or whatever. And Zeus tells Alcides, hey, why don't you become a god since you drank the ambrosia or whatever. And Alcides is like, fine, but on one condition, is you'll never harm humanity again. And Zeus says, fine, and in return you'll lead humanity to righteousness, right? And he agrees. So obviously neither of them held up their end of the deal. But whatever. And after ascending to godhood, Alcides was given the name Heracles to respect Zeus's wife Hera, who we have not seen at all. She's just been kind of mentioned this one time. But this is where Heracles gets his name. Go back to the present with Ares fanboying about how awesome Heracles is and how honored he was to have got to fight him. And that because of that, he believes in him wholeheartedly. So we show that Heracles has gotten right up to Jack. He has survived his onslaught of throwing knives and is about to do this big overhead strike on him. And he says, foul evildoer, be gone from my sight. In response to this, Jack reaches into both of his pouches, which I guess is kind of a reveal that it's more of like a belt with two pouches, and he pulls out the pieces to make an umbrella, which he spins and uses like a shield to deflect Heracles' attack, which causes a big explosion when it hits the ground. And this is just when all of the humans are cheering Jack for being clever enough to avoid Heracles' attack. And this is where we see that Castor and Heracles' other buddies from Thebes are all here, and they're still cheering for Heracles because he's their hero. He's the guy that saved all their lives and stuff. So, with this, you have Heracles grabbing onto his club with both hands, looking all serious. And you see this tattoo that he has on his body begins to spread. And this freaks out Ares, who's like, oh my god, Heracles, you're going to use that move? Heracles yells out, mighty Nemean lion, feast on my flesh. And you see the tattoo start to like smoke and spread further down his arm onto his hand. And the eyes on his club is like a lion head. And the eyes start to glow, and then get super huge and spiky. And this is where we get the reveal of Heracles' ability, the Herculean Exodus. You have a big panel of Heracles holding his club up in the air over Jack with a spotlight coming down on him. The first labor, Nemean lion. And he brings the club down, and there's this big explosion with the lion's roaring face on it. Jack tries to dodge out of the way and use his umbrella as a shield, but the umbrella is obliterated. Jack gets sent flying back into a wall, and he coughs up blood. So everyone, all the gods and Heracles' Greek buddies are cheering him on for this. Loki asks Ares, what's the matter? Like, why are you so freaked out about him using this? And this is where we get the reveal that the tattoo on Heracles' body spread from using the Herculean Exodus, which really freaks out all the kids and stuff. This is where Ares explains that before becoming a god, Heracles performed 12 labors, which we know from his myth, and in return he got 12 divine techniques. But they're so powerful that every time he uses them, there's like a fireback. They call it a fireback? Backfire? Why the fuck would I say fireback? I'm dyslexic. But there's a rebound or whatever, because it's so strong that it harms him. Even a natural god would feel immense pain from a 1 millimeter growth, and you see that it's spreading all over Heracles' body, and he's not reacting to it at all. Loki asks Ares what would happen if it spread all over his body, and this is where Ares reveals that if that happened, he would die, which seems to entertain Loki. So this is where we get the stakes for Heracles. Every time he uses this ability, it eats away at his life, or whatever. So him using this is a big risk and reward thing. So if he uses it, it's gotta be, like, really helpful. The reward for using it needs to be much higher than the cost, which is his life. So Jack gets up, and he comments on how amazing that ability is. And you notice that his arm is drooping down way lower than it should be, because it's dislocated. So he just kind of flings it back into its socket. And then he quotes Shakespeare, which of course Heracles doesn't recognize because he was alive way before Shakespeare was a thing. And this is where we get the reveal of Shakespeare, who looks silly, he looks like a cartoon character. But, yeah, it's from Macbeth, the line. So, Shakespeare wonders if Jack is a fan of his, but he feels bad that it wasn't able to stop it, that his work wasn't able to stop a serial killer. Because Shakespeare's works are always supposed to have some sort of lesson to them, as any good literature should. And if Jack still became a serial killer, regardless of being a fan of his work, then that means it didn't work as well as he'd hoped it would. But with that, you have Jack commenting about how the first act of this little play has been great. So then he reaches into his pouch and pulls out the pieces to make a giant, ridiculous butterfly knife and says, let's go to Act 2. So he charges at Heracles, and Heracles attacks back, pushes back Jack, who then, I guess he turns the butterfly knife into like a fan, because there are all these more blades that pop out of it, and he flings it at Heracles, who dodges, and as the butterfly knife is flinging past him, he throws more of his normal knives at him, which Heracles then has to dodge. And then the butterfly knife is turning back around, and Heracles jumps over it and has to deflect more knives. But after doing the attack, which got in the way of his line of sight, he sees that Jack is gone and looks up to see that Jack has used his grappling hook to go up the building, and he throws the butterfly knife at him again, which, of course, Heracles dodges again. And Heracles continues destroying the throwing knives. And as the butterfly knife is coming back around again, he just smashes down on it. If you hadn't noticed, my description of the combat is way more detailed. Are you fucking kidding me? Alright, that lasted longer than I thought. I totally forgot that the fire department and the police department are doing like their little show of support or whatever to healthcare workers. They haven't done that before, so I wasn't expecting that. But whatever. As I was saying, the combat in this fight is far more complex than any of the other ones so far. God, are they fucking coming back again? Whatever. Anywho. The combat in this fight is way more complicated than it has been in any of the other ones, because Jack and Heracles' fighting styles are completely different from each other. And also the fact that Jack is able to produce anything that he can fit in the bag. So this fight has a lot of creative different stuff going on in comparison to the first fight, where it was just Thor and Lubu swinging at each other, and the second fight where it's just Adam and Zeus punching and kicking each other, and the third fight where it's mostly Kojiro trying to dodge all of Poseidon's attacks. But Heracles gets through this onslaught of attacks and swings at Jack, and Jack leaps out of the way and then leaps up into the air like multiple times. He's doing air jumping. This is where we see that Jack has actually been leaping up on piano wire. So this fight is probably my second favorite, and I think the reason it's probably not my actual favorite is because there are a few plot holes. A couple plot holes. The first one being, when the fuck did Jack have the time to set up all this piano wire? Unless, the only explanation I could have for it is that this was part of the blueprints for reproducing London. Alright. I mean, I don't know if the gods reproduced London based on their knowledge of what it looked like, or if Jack gave them actual fucking schematics for how to reproduce the city. But anyway, Jack asks Heracles if he has an umbrella because rain is common in London, and we see all these throwing knives that he has. And he throws them up into the air, and they're all pushing back on the wires. And Jack wraps his hands in the wires and says, oh, shit, it's a shame. If only I was able to give you that umbrella from earlier. And he pulls the wires, and it flings all the throwing knives at Heracles. But because this is a manga, and physics don't exist, this little trick that Jack is doing is accelerating the knives and causing them to bounce in a bunch of different directions. Which means Heracles is in a really shitty position where blocking all of these knives is almost impossible for him. So his response is to grab his club with both hands and use the Herculean Exodus again. So this time he uses the sixth labor, the Birds of Stymphalia. So his club turns into like this giant eagle or whatever, and he swings it, and the air pressure blows back all the knives towards Jack. Some of them hit him. One hits him in the leg, and another one knocks off his monocle. He came in wearing this weird monocle with a bunch of clockwork in it, and no one knew how it worked. So this is kind of a big reveal. But Jack falls back down to the ground, and he's muttering, and then he says, "Excellent!" And we have the reveal of Jack's hidden eye. It has like this spiral in it. And he's saying to Heracles, "Oh, that's great. Please, please become more confident." And we see this perspective of Heracles that Jack has using his eye. And you see like these, they kind of look like veins, I guess. I originally thought he was looking at like his nervous system or something before we got the explanation of his ability. But he says, "That immovable will of yours is such a nice color." So it would seem that Jack's ability allows him to see Heracles' will or something. But Jack takes the knife out of his leg, and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got really excited there for a second. After all, this is my first time with God." And he does this hag-out face or whatever. He's, Jack's quite the character, as we'll come to find out. But moving on to the next chapter, you have Jack muttering to himself about how he wants to see the color that Heracles will be dyed in when he dies. And then he starts doing like this stage dance on the tips of his toes, and he looks at his reflection, the reflection of his eye in the knife that was stabbed into his leg, and then he starts singing "London Bridge is Broken Down," which confuses the whole audience. And he starts like, it's like a stage performance for him singing this song. He's got like all the arm movements and stuff. And this is where we go into Jack's backstory in 19th century London. So we don't really know who Jack was in real life. Jack the Ripper is, of course, his, what's the word I'm looking for? Shit. It was just like a nickname given to him as a serial killer, since no one figured out who he was. They just called him Jack the Ripper. But as we can see, Jack was a impoverished child who was scrounging around for food, and because of his shitty conditions, he developed the ability to see people's emotions with his eye, and used this ability in order to survive. So, that's not how real life works, but whatever. This is a manga, so it's fine. But Jack uses his ability to see people's emotions in order to manipulate them and get what he wants out of them. So he gets some food out of this chef who was being an asshole to him for him trying to take scraps from the dumpster. But Jack goes back home, which is a brothel, and you meet his mother, whose name is Mary. And this is where we see the relationship between Jack and his mom. And his mom seems to be a very kind, caring person who cares about Jack's well-being over her own. And when Jack looks at his mom, because he can see her emotions, she's like this glowing, angelic figure, and he thinks that his mother is the most beautiful person in the world. Her color is unlike that of any other person. So Jack's sitting around reading Shakespeare, the sonnets of Shakespeare. Compilation book of Shakespeare's sonnets. Yeah, that's neat. And this is where we meet Jack's prostitute buddy. I think her name's Anne? Yeah, Anne. Anne's an alcoholic. She's kind of a fun little character we see a little bit. I don't know why. She doesn't even have the biggest boobs out of the characters in this, but for some reason, I think it's because of what she's wearing. They just look bigger. I guess that'd be an actual, like, marketing technique as a prostitute, but whatever. Anne talks about how they have a really shitty life here, and how she feels bad for Jack having to grow up here. But Jack's like, "Nah, it's fine, it's cool. I don't mind living here." After that, we get an explanation that Mary had gotten pregnant 5 times before Jack and had aborted all of them, but for some reason decided to give birth to Jack. And I say Jack because that's just the only thing we know him as, but none of the characters in his backstory ever say his name, and as a child he's just referred to as the boy. Because we never learned what his name was in real life, and of course we're not going to learn what it is here. But anyway, Jack says he's the happiest boy in the world. And they talk about how he was happy and stuff until that fateful day when he comes home and his mom is freaking out. And it's revealed that she's freaking out because this guy, this actor or whatever, got married. And this is where we find out that this guy promised Mary that he would come back for her once he started getting really successful, and that he'd basically rescue her from this shitty existence as a prostitute. And Anne tells Jack that, or no, she's talking to Mary and mentions how he made the promise 13 years ago and it's her fault for believing it. But now Jack is in the room with his mom alone and he's trying to comfort her, and she freaks out and starts yelling at him. And Jack tries to put on a happy face, but his mom's still freaking out and screaming. And she says that she should have never given birth to Jack. And that without that guy, without him, there was never any point in having him. Actually, should have just aborted him. This is really awful, and Jack starts crying. And this is where it's revealed that the beautiful color of true love that Jack had seen in his mom was not for him, but it was for that man, the guy who promised he would come back for her. And now that his mother is freaking out, she is not this beautiful color anymore. She's all these horrible, ugly colors of, I guess, anger and sadness. So Jack starts strangling his mom and says that he will free her from her grief. And he sees a new color when this happens, and he wants to know what it is. He thinks it may be fear. He notices how the color of fear is overriding all of the other colors that she was showing before. And he realizes that this was the first time in his life that he had seen the color of fear permeate someone's whole body. And he thought about how it was the most beautiful color he'd ever seen, how it was unlike anything he'd seen before. So his mother breaks out of his grip and yells at him, and then he stabs her in the neck. And he remarks about how amazing this color is. And they show her, like, bleeding out of her throat, but it's with Jack's perspective from his eye, so she's glowing in this color that Jack finds to just be unbelievably beautiful. And there's this horrifying panel of Jack cradling his mother's body with blood splattered all over the walls and the ceiling of the room. And at this point, it's very clear that Jack has lost his fucking mind. So after that, he goes and finds his dad, and he murders him. And he takes his hat, the hat that he's wearing now, and he runs off into the streets of London. And that is how Jack the Ripper is born. Whoever Jack was before then, that person's not there anymore. This is the birth of the serial killer Jack the Ripper. Now we flash back to Jack, who was reminiscing about his past, looking into his reflection. And I think for just this one panel, you have him looking at his reflection as he's singing London Bridge Has Fallen Down. And I think this is a break in his sort of persona as a crazy serial killer, where he just has sort of this expression where he's deep in thought, thinking about the past. And I really like when series do stuff like this with their characters, especially the insane, murderous ones. I quite like this. We will get some very nice stuff with Jack's character going forward. We're only like halfway through the fight, so we're in for a long one. This is the longest fight so far. But Jack goes on a spiel about how he always got to see people's emotions, and the moment before someone's death, they would be consumed by the color of fear, removing all impurities, and how it was a truly beautiful sight. So in response, Heracles says the only thing he fears is when he parts with justice. So they go back into their combat, Jack throwing knives and Heracles deflecting them. And eventually, Jack gets pushed back to Big Ben. And he tries to climb up the tower using his grappling hook. But the little piece of ledge that he caught onto broke, so then he was just climbing it up, or he was climbing up it by hand. And he eventually gets up to, like, the clock face. So Heracles uses his club, and he breaks the base of Big Ben, and it falls over and, like, falls up against another building. So Jack is hanging here in this very precarious situation. Using this opportunity, Heracles decides that he's going to use the Herculean Exodus again, so he prepares the 7th labor, and his club turns into a bull, and this is where we find out he's about to use the Cretan bull. So he gets ready to do this attack. I assume it is going to be like a ranged attack, considering how far away from him he is. So, in a last act of desperation, Jack takes out the clock face of Big Ben and flings it at Heracles, who, thinking that this is just like a piece of environment, it's not a divine weapon, so it can't do anything to it, he moves his left arm to block it. And it cuts his fucking arm off. Everyone is shocked by this. So, Heracles had told him that doing this attack was useless. Obviously, it was not. And Jack says, "Yeah, I heard you every time. So, how does it feel, my fair lady?" And you have this gross smile from him with his ratty mustache and creepy teeth. Alright, so we're only about halfway through the fight, and we're already over 50 minutes into the video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be splitting this up into 2 halves. We're at about, I'd say, the halfway mark of the fight. So, I'll just have this as the first part of my read-through and discussion, and I'll try to have the second part out in the next few days. So please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed this, and if you look forward to my future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.